Hey guys, welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Big one today. Really excited to have David Gray with me on the show. David has done something that I think is very, very difficult to do. We run in very similar circles. We speak similar languages, although he does it with a much nicer accent than I do. So if you're not from Ireland and you find the Irish accent endearing, buckle up. You're in for a treat. But no, David Gray is probably one of the, if not the foremost educators in rehabilitation, plyometrics, biomechanics, just a great way of communicating underlying subject matter expertise. He's done it all under his name, which I love his ability to scale his business under him personally. I like the accountability of that. I like what he's done with his products and his podcasts and in the conversation, both pre and post that I was privy to. Just his ambition in growing the brand and servicing the industry, unmatched. So huge thanks to David Gray for coming on the show. I hope you guys enjoy the episode. A couple announcements before we get started. Prescript X Mind Pump PSL1. If you've been looking to get into the Prescript Level 1 course, we have a secret semester. The secret semester starts March 18th, and it's online, and we're running it in collaboration with Mind Pump. So if you want to sign up, the only way you can register for that online PSL1 is by going to www.pre-script.com/mind-pump-PSL1. In the show notes, I know it's a bit of a mouthful, so head on over there. And if you guys want to join us and the Mind Pump crew online for 16 weeks of PSL1, we snuck in an extra one this semester. And if you guys fancy getting to California, I know I do because it's freezing here. We're running a in-person 3-day kickoff event live for the Prescript Level 1. So if you sign up for the in-person weekend from March 15th to 17th, ton of extras all listed on the website. Get to hang with the Mind Pump guys, watch a podcast recording, do a Q&A, plus we do a 2-day in-person PSL1 event. So a shit ton of fun. I've been to the studio. We've collaborated on so many things before. These guys are definitely big brothers to me and Jordan in the industry, and it's going to be a lot of fun to be able to bring this back to Mind Pump Studios. That too is on the link. So if you guys are interested, head on over and click that, and we'll see you Santa Clara Bay Area, California. Nothing better, especially in the middle of March when it's freezing in Toronto, Ontario. So we'll see you guys there. Reach out to David Gray. I highly recommend it. If you're having any issues, head to his website, davidgrayrehab.com. You can check out his workshops, his podcasts, his programs. Huge shout out to Dave. Appreciate you guys for tuning in always. We'll hopefully see some of you in person in California in a handful of weeks. Dave, appreciate your time. Lundy, hit it.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
David Gray, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, I would like to know what the most ridiculous place in the world that people have assumed your accent is from.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. No, it's always Ireland. It's maybe Scotland the odd time, but I basically always get Ireland. Boy, would you
really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I get odd ones. Like I have an accent of the world. Like I say mate more than probably most people in Canada ever would, because I spend so much time in the UK and Oz. But like I've gotten like South African. I'm like, first off, to me, obviously, like no one thinks they have an accent. But with you, I would imagine like anything former Commonwealth, Ireland, Scotland, South African, Australian, like most people are just shooting in the dark.
I don't talk to many people though that don't know me. So like either you know who I am and where I'm from, or else like, not that I don't want to talk to you, but I just keep my head down kind of thing. Maybe someone listening to that just sounded really weird to them, but I just have my own bubble and I just stick in that. So they tend to know what country I'm from. It's my wife, my dog, and then people on Instagram and people at workshops. That's it. So we're good with that.
Now, I'm assuming most people, if they are listening to the show, they'll know who you are. But for the odd person who might not know, give us a little bit of background about David Gray Rehab. Like, how did you end up in the position where you're in now?
Okay, I'll give you the elevator pitch because I'm really sick of doing the intros, as I'm sure you are.
Dude. This is work for me now.
Look, I just played a lot of sports, particularly Irish sports, all my life. Gaelic football and hurling are two field-based sports, kind of a mix between AFL, rugby for our football, and then hurling is like lacrosse paired with, I don't know, some larger field kind of a sport. And I just kept getting injured, and I was just super frustrated. Patellar tendinopathy that went on for about 10 years, and it just drove me insane, literally insane, because my whole life was identifying as an athlete, not a professional athlete, but an athlete that was like trying to do my very best. And I was improving rapidly at one stage because I wasn't particularly talented or didn't have maybe the best genetics, but I was improving rapidly with a little bit of gym work and working on my skills, and I just kept getting injured. Patellar tendon, Achilles tendinopathies, hips were kind of jacked up, and I was just really frustrated with the care that I received. And looking back, some of it was poor therapists, poor coaches, poor doctors. Some of it was I probably didn't do the best for myself. I maybe wasn't listening to them some of the time. And most of it, to be honest, was probably just the time that we were in. Even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I know people like are very negative about the industry now. And in some ways they should be, but honestly, like the average of the industry, I think, has improved at a ton in the last decade. And yes, there's always going to be terrible coaches and therapists, but I think the average is really good now at this stage, or a lot better. And I think the best guys and girls are way better than they were before. So yeah, just through years of kind of getting frustrated and thinking, okay, I'm just going to try and figure this out for myself, which meant not really figuring it out for myself, but more like, okay, I'm going to travel around, meet people, listen to different people, and explore different worlds and fields of thought. And that kind of brought me to where I am today, which was the natural progression was, okay, I'm going to do this for a job now and help other people. And we're at a stage now where we have a mix of like, okay, we rehab mostly active people. It is active people. I don't really like convincing people to exercise. So I work with people who really want to exercise and train, regardless of what they want to do for their training, and people who are injured, or else those kind of athletes that are maybe injured but not really, which I'm sure you have worked with many of those, where they're 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 able to play their sport but they feel like crap and they're being held back, and you're trying to work around it. So it's active people and mostly then athletes as well. So that's half our business, and the other half is just educating coaches and therapists around what we do. So yeah, that's it.
So there's I think there's a high level takeaway here, because you talk about the elevator pitch, you talk about the redundancy of doing this on podcasts, which we should all, I think you and I should be like the Joker in the new Joaquin Phoenix, where we just have a laminated card and we laugh and we hand it to people like, I have a condition, like here's my life story. But there are, and this is a question I want to explore a little bit further in the hour, is there are a lot of people that want to do what you do, and I'm sure a part of your DMs inquiries, other than ouch, my knee hurts, is like, how did you get to that? Like, that's the Cole's Notes elevator pitch version of the high level stuff. But like, there's a differentiating factor that makes you like, what is it? And might be a difficult question to answer, because I know you to be a humble dude, but like, what is it about either the way that you came about learning the information that you did, or that or whether it's how you impart it, or whether it's what is it? Like, what advice do you give to people, trainers, coaches who look to kind of emulate a similar model? Like, what was a catalyst for you that made you someone that was like really worth listening to, you think?
Great question. Really good question. You know what? Everyone wants to pin things on one thing. And I've noticed this with athletes as well. I'll go around it this way, where you work with an NFL player who's amazing versus someone who didn't quite make it. And everyone wants to say, like, he was just a bit faster, or he was just a bit stronger, or like taller, or whatever. And actually, when you really get to work with amazing athletes, it was actually, no, they're a bit better at all of these things, and all of those things compound. And I'm not particularly intelligent or anything, but I just consistently worked on all of the things that makes up a good coach or therapist. I just like to think of myself as a coach, which is I'm just coaching movement most of the time, coaching people. So I consistently tried to work on just weaknesses in my game all of the time, because as you'll see, the arguments online now are about pain science versus biomechanics versus do I coach movement or not? Is it just about load? Is it programming? And that's all nonsensical to me. It's about being able to communicate really, really well, being able to build authority with the person that's in front of you, being able to get your message out there, which might mean social media and word of mouth, being able to assess movement really well, coach movement really well, program movement really well, know when to progress and regress. So honestly, the honest answer, I think, is I was not good at any of those things, but I was just hungry to get better at all of those things. And I had good teachers along the way. My biggest skill is probably recognizing good teachers who, like, when I hear someone talk, I can filter through. Not always, like, I've gone down rabbit holes that turned out to be not so good, but even I think that there's a good learning from that, which is just don't be afraid to go down a rabbit hole, but just keep your eyes open to everything else, I guess. So honestly, the answer is consistency for years, working at where I'm weakest. And if I have one skill, it's finding good teachers. And if I have one other skill, it's curiosity. It's just being really curious about movement. Like when I look at a person moving, I try, or we all have our biases 100%, but I try to be just like, why the fuck are they doing it that way? and and actually just look at the moving and then say, right, what if we try this? I wonder, will this work? And what if we try that? I wonder, will that work? And curiosity and consistency are the two big things.
How has the digestion or the production to consumption of information changed, do you think, or have you noticed since your time as a student, as you now step into, an authority as an educator in the space? Like you said earlier about like, hey, look, 15 years ago, man, when we were playing, I remember shoulder injury in hockey when I was a kid and looking at the common accepted best practices then versus now. And, you have to judge people to the standard of their time. And I don't think therapy is no different than that. So it's easy to get on our high horse. But in the world of, education and continuing education, especially in our space, how have you seen like the trends change from when you got into it to now, as you've sort of graduated from one side of the desk to the other as student kind of turned teacher?
Good question. I think that the biggest thing that has changed is understanding load as a variable, as a tool, and actually trying to use load to correct things. I don't like to use that word correct things, but being aggressive with load early on when you're working with someone and progressing load throughout. And that comes with obviously speed and different intensities and volume and all of this stuff. But when I look back in 10 or 15 years ago, like every single thing that I was given basically was all corrective exercise, what would be labeled corrective exercise, without ever any real amount of load that was ever going to be involved. And that you just, especially in the rehab world, you cannot bridge the gap from my knee is absolutely fucked here to now I need to get back to sprinting, change of direction, decelerating, taking contact, dealing with all this stuff. So you're finally now seeing on social media, especially, people who are using various loads, speeds, intensities, and volumes, and at a suitable level, I would say, with people. And I don't think, honestly, I'm sure you've seen this as well. In the past, physios, therapists were not doing that. They were doing very small movements and passing it over to the S&C coach then. And the S&C coach, the worlds are combining. And I back in the day, I would have, if you transported me 10 years ago, I would 100 times out of 100 have chosen a good S&C coach over quote unquote a good physio. But now I don't think you need to do that anymore. I think the physio can do that for you. So load is
Now,
probably the biggest one.
Okay, if you were to enter into the field today, knowing what you know now, and knowing where the state of the industry is, like, what advice would you give to a coach as far as, like, maybe contrast? What was your first continuing education? Now, you said you kind of had a knack for picking good teachers, so maybe this might not be a use case for all people, but your first deep dive into this type of thing, 10, 15 years ago, if you were to advise someone now, hey, deep dive into this, obviously, like load and understanding load as a variable stimulus that we can apply, and can train with all of the other training variables, intensity, volume, duration, frequency, etc. Where would you tell someone to start? Like, hey, I want to get into understanding rehab mechanics. Okay,
Yep.
read this or do this.
Good question. On an individual level, I would be trying to poke and figure out where they're weakest. So, and what type of people they want to work with. Do you want to work with field sport athletes? You don't necessarily have to choose, but like, do you have a preference? So, I would poke and delve into that. Is it like, okay, you're super weak on the plyometric stuff, you're super weak on the return to running and agility stuff, you're super weak on the early stage stuff, you're super weak on the like getting people back into the gym and progressing and lifting, you're super weak on the communication side of things, where actually, yes, you have a good plan, but no one's fucking listening to you. So I would try and delve into that. But all of that does depend on having a good model, I guess, a good lens to look at movement through. And I don't know, where would you go? Where would you, like, I'm going to just say find a good mentor, like maybe hopefully me, maybe hopefully you, maybe people like that. Like, that's the honest answer, is find a good mentor who seems to have a good grasp on all of those things, and dive head first, because you will expedite your learning by a decade if you can do that.
Yeah, I think we're similar in the sense of our origin stories. Like, necessity is the mother of all creation, which I think is what kind of paved the way for both of our career paths. Was like, there was a necessity to figure out how to solve your problems because no one else could seem to solve it. And I think that's something that I see, at least when I'm posed with the question, is that's the missing link, is most people aren't willing to physically step out on the ledge themselves and risk getting hurt, which is oftentimes leads to people. And I'm interested to get your take on this, because I've been, I don't want to say advising against, but I'm always very cautious of, and this is going to sound bad, but I'm always very cautious of people who use the veil of, well, I'm a lifelong learner. It's like, you're unwilling to make a mistake. Like, that's what and it's not true of everyone. And obviously, like, there's a certain level of curiosity that keeps us engaged in the field. And, you and I are continuously learning through our experiences. But I think a lot of people, and this is really counterintuitive, like, I own an education platform that teaches people. And I'm often telling people, like, stop, enough, because you're nerfing your accountability and you're just learning a bunch of stuff for no reason. It's just like, it is becoming, and I kind of want to, you talked about communication, and I think this is something where you excel. And I think a reason that you excel is because your ability to communicate through social media. It's like, how do you have a conversation with a platform where people can't talk back? Mm-hmm. When you first started, kind of relaying the knowledge you had learned through trial by fire, through getting injured, through mentors and good coaches, what was your initial approach to putting your content out into the world for others to digest?
I will go back a step, Jordan, just what you said about the continuous learning. Because I do think this is an important point to touch on. I hear people talking constantly about adding another tool to my toolbox. And recently that's been doing my head in, because actually people aren't adding any fucking tools. They're just changing tools. They just do a new course. Okay, now I use this for 6 months. Then I do another new course. I do this for 6 months. I have no problem if people are adding tools to the toolbox, but a lot of the people I see that say that are just changing tools, one for the next. I did do massage, now I do dry needling. I did do dry needling, now I do something else. And that applies to every other world of type of training that you're doing as well. So I would rather people worked on the toolbox itself, which is actually your lens of how you look at actually the world, not just movement, how you look at the world. Are you inherently, do you see it as like people are inherently fragile or not? Are you viewing the world as an optimist, a pessimist, a realist, whatever? So the toolbox is what you need to work on. And then you can allow yourself to pick and choose tools because you actually have a good lens of analyzing what to put in it. So that's what I would say there. A couple of years ago, I realized that I was doing that myself, probably 3 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I was just jumping from course to course, and I had to just stop. I cut the cord on that, and I said, right, for a couple of years, I'm going to dive in with my clients. We're also lucky in some ways that we're semi-isolated in like the south of Ireland. We're not in a big hub of, oh, there's hundreds of gyms around us and other clinicians, and I was just on my own. We had some online therapists that were working with us, but I was just like, I'm going to work on my model for a while, and I'm just going to see what happens, not listening to anyone else, but I work with clients like, what do I actually really think about things, and how would my model develop? And that was amazing for me. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, was taking that choice. And I do want to be careful. I'm not encouraging people or discouraging people from learning. That was after 10 or 12 or 15 years of literally being obsessive with learning. But it got to a stage where I had to say, okay, let's stop this for a while and see what I actually think about things. So the content side of things, I've always, if anyone ever looks at my content, you will see clients in my content all of the time. It's always me coaching a client doing a drill, me talking about, look at this client doing this exercise, or a carousel of clients that fit together in some way. Like, okay, here's all the plyometrics we use with this type of person. So I've always done that because I always felt like it offered a lot of proof that actually I'm not just talking about this stuff, I'm using this stuff with people on a day-to-day basis. And I've been doing that for 5 or 6 years now with content, basically every day for 3 years now. And it's been amazing. I don't think people do that enough, especially in the therapy side of things, because they think, oh, I can't record my client, they're in pain. And I know in America, I think in Australia, actually, I don't think they're really allowed to do that. So there's certain things with that. But I think if you can actually get a set of balls and start to ask your client, you're doing a set of squats, do you mind if I record you? It's not, they're afraid that someone is going to say to them, like, oh, you're not coaching your client, you're just recording them. No, the session was an hour long and I did a 30-second video. And also I was able to show my client, look at you squatting here, and we're able to pick out a couple of things if we need to. So that's always been a huge thing on my content, is number one, sharing what I do with my clients, not just talking about abstract stuff. Number two has been consistency, posting basically every day for a few years now. And number three has been trying to always give my honest thoughts and not try my best not to bullshit people. I probably have bullshitted people, but I try my best, like you, to just fucking say what's on my mind on that day. And that's been a very potent way of building our brand. And if you told me a few years ago I'd be talking to someone like you on a podcast, or we'd have our own podcast or all this stuff, like, I wouldn't believe it. So people are very negative about social media. There is big negatives, but you can change your life using that.
I think it's something too that, and this is where I advise people at the very least to start stepping out of the ledge, or stepping out onto the ledge, and, you know, taking a bit of, I'm going to air quote, risk, because it's not like they're storming Normandy. They're posting shit on social media. Like, there's no real risk involved here. But I think one thing that it's helped for me, regardless of the media of content creation, whether it be books, whether it be blogs, whether it be podcasts, is, and to the earliest point off the jump about your delivery, I feel like for me, at the very least, it's on two things. One, it's put a mirror in front of the way I think and made me reconcile opposing thought processes. Going like, how in a logical brain can someone say these two things at the same time? It's like, oh shit, okay, hold on. I got to delete that story and not sound like an idiot. I maybe want to dig in on that first one first. Are there anything that come to mind, either old thought processes you held on to or beliefs that you had that you've since then changed, or things that can simultaneously live in opposition and you have difficulty reconciling, either technical or tactical? Are the things that you state that jump out at you that go, I used to think this, now I think that, or I think both of these things, and I don't know, it's just, It just works.
I just kind of have a constant to and fro over the biomechanics side of things, how important it is. And when I see, if I look at my old posts a few years back, like I definitely couldn't repost something because I would edit my caption and change it up. I would have to change it up. So I just get maybe I'm just getting grumpy, but when I see a person who like is obsessed with biomechanics talking about pain and saying X, Y, and Z, it's your little toe and blah, 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 that gets me really annoyed. And then when I see someone saying that biomechanics is like irrelevant, that gets me really annoyed as well. So yeah, I think I'm just getting grumpy I won't say as I get older, but I just have much less patience for crap. So I have to remember that I was probably that person a few years back saying shit that I don't believe in anymore. Especially, I just went too heavy on the biomechanics side, but that's very hard but I love looking at movement and I love coaching movement. And basically every day we have changes with clients. We make changes with clients, and not short-term changes either. We change a little bit of how they move. It seems like they've been avoiding something in their hip or their knee or their foot. It seems like you can make a little bit of changes and help guide them into a position they haven't been in a while. Their nervous system has been avoiding, and sometimes pain goes away. Sometimes like different tissues light up, and it's hard to reconcile that with the thought process that is being pushed in the industry right now that biomechanics is irrelevant. So yeah, I just to and fro on that. I don't know. What would your answer be?
Oh, yeah.
What did you used to think that you're not so sure about?
I've gone full circle on manual therapy. Obviously, like starting off my career in the manual therapy field in chiropractic, I was really off it, and I was very exercise heavy, almost exercise exclusive for a long time. And I think part of that was just because chiropractic is seen in some circles in a very negative light, and I think in some cases rightfully so, because that was all they did. Like that was the impetus to the original Instagram handle was like, okay, I know I'm in chiropractic college. Everyone's going to default that I'm just like cracking bones. I want to deal primarily with muscle. Well, how do you deal with muscle? For me, it was exercise. So I really jumped off the exercise centric deep end for like a really long time. And then as I started to work my way up with the skilled athletes, you start to realize that psychology trumps physiology and that preference. And that a lot of times, like the preference of treatment modality when it comes to like, you know, stimulus to fatigue ratios and treatment was like, look, these guys don't want to lift necessarily because they play 162 games in a major league season, or, you know, they play 82 games and they're on the road. And so then I've kind of like, I really leaned back in heavy into manual therapy and maybe even reducing down to that into like self-myofascial release. Anecdotally, like it's just too hard to ignore, right? Like I think for a long time, my driving force was to be seen as smart. And I realized that my driving force was actually probably just to help people. And if someone said, oh, I like foam rolling, I probably used to call them an idiot. And now I'm like, yeah, sick. That's like probably the first thing that you're going to see on your program is the thing that you told me that you liked. I'm not going to take that, you know, that shiny red ball away from you. I'm going to, you know, I might try and weave in some things that might minimize that local or global tissue stress. But you get to keep the thing that you like. Like this life short, we'll be dead in 30, 40 years. You probably a little bit longer if we discuss that I'm the picture on the back of the cigarette pack. But I think that's for me. And maybe this is, I had a couple of technical questions queued up. And I think this is a little bit boilerplate for most, but I'm actually really curious as to your take on it. Because one thing that I think has been habitually scrutinized by the hyper academic in this line of thought is static stretching. Now, you know, it's very hard to reconcile the hyper academic research crowd with the practitioner specific crowd, right? So I've been thinking a lot recently about my thoughts, I guess like a meta thought about stretching on the whole, and wanted to see where you like what a sound bite might be when someone comes to you about your position or stance on the efficacy of static stretching.
Yes. So I dived very deep into the whole stretching world for quite a while. I was in the gymnastics world. I was in the Ido Portal world, which was like the more active, he called it active, or what was it? Loaded. progressive mobility or something like that, and the FRC worlds, stretch therapy, where there's a lot of static, long held stretching, sometimes with a partner, like lying on a certain body part or doing different things. It really, really didn't help me. I was a very tight individual, and most of the stretches were being held at my very end ranges, trying to like get an extra couple of degrees here and there, and my body completely locked up as a result. So my bias is I don't love it, but I actually see that stretching works really, really well for people who aren't that tight. For people who are super tight, I don't think stretching works that well, especially like when you start to see, it's not just that they're tight at their ankle, let's say. They don't have much ankle dorsiflexion. Yes, like moving into end range and holding there and stretching, let's say, and static or whatever, it will help if it's just an isolated joint. But if you have a lot of people who are tight everywhere. They're not just tight at their ankles. They have tight hips. They're just kind of wound up that way. Their spine doesn't move that much. Their ribs don't move that much. Their shoulders don't move that much. And their neck doesn't move that much. So I don't find it particularly potent to go around, because now I have to go around stretching every tight muscle in your body if I want you to be more mobile, because I value movement. So if we're going to say mobility in your ankles is important, I also think that mobility in your spine is important, your neck is important, your shoulders. I think where you have joints, you hopefully can move them. So I just don't think stretching is particularly potent for tight people, because they tend to be tight everywhere, and I rather get them moving in ways that is more potent, more full body movement. But having said that, the most mobile people that I've come across over the years, gymnasts and kind of contortionist type of people, they all do long static stretching. So if you have particular flexibility related goals, like being able to do the front splits, the side splits, other positions like this, it does seem like static, not just like active loaded movements, but long held static stretches are, I would say, very, very useful. But I typically not so much anymore. I don't really have clients that are working on that type of stuff. I don't really work with gymnasts or people who need their very, very, very end ranges to look like that. So I think it can help. I think it can open up range, but I think there's better ways. That would be my short thought process.
I think I've just been playing with the idea, and I'm interested to get your thought on it, that in taking an appraisal over time and listening to people when they give me a list of things that they find palliative, and stretching makes it onto a list, probably if we're kind of trying to refine the data and parse out the signal from the noise, probably because that's the only thing they know, right? Like stretching is first cab off the rank, as an Aussie would say, when it comes to intervention. Something is tight, stretch it. Probably has to do with a very superficial understanding of what a muscle or why a muscle gets tight to begin with. But I've been playing with this idea of, like, it seems to be, and not always, but it seems to be more effective in those where any type of, like, I guess, what is the straightest line to this point? The more deconditioned a person is, the more meaningful that tension on the muscle seems to be. And I think it's never a conversation that's had about, well, what is the stimulus threshold of this muscle? Like, if a muscle can stretch under, some sort of 100-pound dumbbells, then sure, anything less than that's probably not going to check a box in the nervous system. But one thing that I've seen repeatedly, at least in like alleviating symptoms around pain and discomfort, is it seems to be more effective if the baseline tolerance of the muscle they're stretching is 0. Because it's probably something, and this is just, I'm kind of spitballing this, it seems to me that that's probably the closest thing tantamount to exercise that people might be getting, right? Like if we look at some sort of conventional rehab of like isometric, eccentric, it's like, well, they're in some sort of isometric or eccentric. Maybe this is the only load they get. Now, would they do better with some sort of dynamic range through a concentric phase and then back into eccentric isometrics? Like, yeah, probably. But I think that's never really been, at least in the circles that I've seen these things contentiously debated, never a layer of nuance that I've seen. That more recently, as I think about it, I go, well, maybe the baseline threshold, the baseline ability of the muscle comes into play as so far as the stimulus being meaningful or not. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that if you talk about that, if you flip that over to the fat loss side of things, it's basically like saying the obese person, if they lie on the floor and just roll around for 10 minutes, they're probably going to lose a bit of weight because they're actually moving and not sitting on the couch. And stretching in that regard is like, okay, if you're sitting on the couch and you don't ever load into any kind of deeper hip flexion, knee flexion, ankle flexion, spinal flexion, stretching in those positions is giving you some load. So your muscles are getting, your body is getting a little bit of a stimulus that it's not usually getting. I would coincide those two things together. And I think in that case, if someone was very inactive and the activity that they liked doing was stretching, I wouldn't discourage that, but I would probably try and slowly over time encourage some other things as well. And yeah, that's my thoughts. I think.
It's always tricky because I think we, in consulting and speaking with and educating therapists, one thing that's always tricky is, and I think, you talk about an athletic population, or at least a population that you don't need to motivate to actually do the rehab and strength training and all that, is the majority of the rehab space is not that, right? It's not the population that's performance oriented. Like it is people who are coming in primarily with pain goals and not performance goals. I maintain that if you still set the horizon to performance, you'll easily and quickly eclipse pain if that's your end goal, is to move better, faster, higher, longer, whatever the metric objectively is. When it comes to confirmation biases, how do you wrestle with the efficacy of interventions between those two things, toggling between novelty and specific variability? Because novelty, like you said, like old mate rolling around on the floor, this is very novel. I'll make the comparison of, like, imagine, someone, you didn't know a lot about nutrition, you were on public transit on a bus somewhere and some big bloke sat next to you and was like, hey man, how do I lose some weight? Maybe just a quick rundown of thermodynamics, calories in, calories out, go for a walk, eat salads, or in this case, roll around on the floor. I'm going to use that from now on. But if Usain Bolt sat down next to you, it would be like, hey man, I ran a 19 200 meters. How do I get faster? It's like, well, you need specific variability, right? You're going to need a specific intervention there, and salads and rolling around on the floor ain't going to do it for our boy Bolt. How is it that how do you help people or advise people to keep an open mind around interventions that maybe might not make sense when they work, and maybe don't cast this aura of like, oh my God, I did this and it works, therefore I do it for everything? Like, how do you advise trepidation? How do you advise on the humility aspect that comes with therapy? Because sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I have no fucking idea. Do you feel better?
Yeah.
Sick. We'll do that.
I think everything is an approximation. We're making our best guess all of the time, and you have to have some level of humility, like you said. That actually, John Kiley on my podcast, who's an Irish, I think he's a PhD. He's a strength and conditioning coach. He's had a very, very long career of working with a lot of sports teams and stuff. But then he also has research on placebo, and he's talked a lot about loads of different stuff. He's a brilliant, brilliant guy, John Kiley. People should check him out. And on my podcast, he said something like placebo and nocebo. We were talking about that, and he said, you are going to either do one of the two. You're going to nocebo someone or placebo someone. There is no middle ground. Like, you cannot use neutral language. It's impossible. If someone asks me, is this exercise or is this manual therapy going to help my back pain? You can say maybe, but like that's not going to be useful enough language for them. You can say I hope so, in which you're already you're after tipping the scale to the placebo side a tiny little bit. So regardless, you have to start to understand if you're using manual therapy or if it's stretching or if it's some other novel stimulus, and you don't like that, you disagree with that type of approach. Your approach, the approach that you prefer is probably providing some of the placebo effect as well, or nocebo. You're going to always be going for one of those. So I prefer to lean on the placebo side of things. I'm going to embrace that effect is in place, that in human psychology, and I'm going to not be dishonest to anyone, but I'm going to lean into that side of things a little bit. And if they are using things that allow them to feel a bit better, I'm going to keep doing that. And education, client education, is a long-term approach, not a short-term approach that I hear everyone, like, okay, someone comes in with back pain, they have 10 limiting beliefs. One is, I always have a bad back, it runs in my family. Limiting, like, stupid belief that your grandfather told you. Another one is, I can't flex my spine. Another one is that discs never heal, and so on and so forth. I don't need to change all of their beliefs and shatter their world in one session. Let's just deal with one at a time and chip away. And education is a long-term play with clients. And I think people are very insecure when they try and go at the education side of things and try and fix everything in one go. No, shut up, make one important change, pick the lowest hanging fruit, and have some humility and go from there.
Yeah, I think it's almost like it's like a manual observer effect. Like whatever treatment modality you choose, you're observing the utility of that, right? You're already trending to that. Because I think one thing that I see a lot, well, a few things that I see a lot is like, I don't know how a lot of people who proclaim and fly very vehemently the evidence-based flag, how they treat anyone. Because I see it like this movement nihilism. Nothing works, nothing's proven. It's like, oh, what do you do for a living? Like, what does your office visit look like for you? That has to be insane. Because, like, to me, and this is actually something that social media has taught me, and it's this idea that an antidote to a bad idea is a better idea. Like, I find our space very contrarian, which makes it leaves little room for originality. Not that I think there's anything new under the sun, but I feel like a lot of which is so dumb, like the knife fighting on the internet over, like, you know, bird dogs versus, I don't know, whatever the fuck, some sort of crawling drill. Like, really, this is what we're banging on about. It's the idea that, not like, just don't say the bad thing. Just say the thing that you like to do is the good thing. Because I feel like that observer effect of, like, the very act of making a decision is starting, like you said, are we going down nocebo and placebo? And for some reason, the therapy world has just gone so negative that they can't define what it is, but they define what they are by what they're not. And they start off with just shunning and shaming everything. And then they go, oh, great. Now that I've usurped the belief throne, I will sit here and we're going to do this treatment. That's like, can't you just do that by doing the thing that you started off thinking, rather than just trashing? It's really off-putting to me, because I thought higher education would get me out of that particular sandbox. And, you know, I didn't want to be having like, oh no, my creatine is better than your creatine. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to study this stuff at a high level, and we'll sit around smoking pipes and drinking single malt whiskeys, and we'll discuss, nope, same shit, same stupid knife fighting.
See, this is why, like you, I like to lean towards the performance side of things, not and just with anyone that I'm working with. Hopefully, along the way, we're going to be jumping higher. We're going to be squatting heavier. We're going to be running faster. We're going to be opening up a bit of mobility, so you have a bit more hip internal and external rotation, if these are important to us. Because that's the opposite of a nihilistic approach. That's, okay, we actually can change these things. And and those evidence-based people, I'm evidence-based. I just don't need to put that in my bio of my Instagram to for that to be important to me. But if those people are saying nothing matters when it comes to pain, okay, fair enough. If that's the case, then I'm going to chase performance, because as you get stronger, as I educate you a little bit and I update your beliefs, as you get a bit fitter, as you learn to be happier in yourself and your body, hopefully pain is going to diminish along the way. I would bank on that being the case, not 100% of the time, but a large majority of the time. Pain is going to decrease as all of those things increase. So I bank on performance all of the time with every single person, and the nihilistic approach just doesn't make sense if you're chasing performance, because when you work with a professional tennis player, you can't say to them nothing matters. Like, how you hit this ball, oh, that doesn't matter. It does matter because it's the difference between millions of dollars and not. It does matter. So I chase performance. If nothing matters when it comes to pain, then let's chase performance and make you better at everything, and pain will still decrease along the way.
Yeah, it's always I remember learning about natural histories. Like, what is the natural history of a cervical spine pain or lumbar spine? It's like, oh, these things tend to resolve themselves. It's like, all right, well, your job is to beat natural history. To your point about performance doesn't have a natural history. Performance is like kind of entropic by nature. It's like, it's not really going to improve upon itself if left unaddressed. No. Pain, if left unaddressed, it's like, yeah, I don't know. My neck hurts because I sleep in fucking 400 Airbnbs a year. But I kind of wake up and I go, okay, like this will sort itself out. But it's like my back squat is not going to sort itself out. So yeah, it's always an interesting, and it's a framing thing, right? And I'm really glad you brought up the worldview thing, because I think it's something that people don't have a metacognition around why they believe what they believe. And broadly speaking, it's indicated on their worldview. Because I think therapists have to get so, down into the granular details of a hysteresis curve or some bullshit like that. It's like, hold on, man. Like, no one cares. Like, no one gives a rat's ass. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that's really more of a reflection of people who have a little bit more of a worldly view about what it is they're doing and how it actually fits in the world. Is that something that you've obviously paid mind to, but is it something that you're consciously updating alongside everything else? Like, how often are you kind of like, I see you to be like a very strong lateral thinker, and that only happens if you are into concepts that are outside of the core of your domain of expertise, which is obviously rehabilitation and resistance training. What does your world outside of this look like?
I think I think the business side that we've been trying to develop has been humongous for me on that side of things, as building me as a character and a person. Because when you work for yourself, firstly, you get the rewards or you get the shit. Like, whatever, if you do a good job, you get the rewards. If you do a crap job, you get the rewards that come with doing a crap job. If you work for someone else, that might not matter. I've worked in jobs in the past where it did not matter if I did a good job or not. I was getting the same pay and no one really cared. So firstly, there's a level of accountability that comes with that, and there's a level of motivation, I think, that needs to come with that. And what I felt with developing our business and building it into like a semi-large business within this space. It's not Tesla, but it's semi-large within this space, and hopefully going to be bigger. And I've kind of stretched my thinking in the last couple of weeks even more to think, actually, are we playing small? Can we go a little bit bigger? The reason being that I wanted to start to think that way and go a little bit bigger is because what I realized very much recently is what has grown me as a person and my worldview is trying to build our business, because we have to continually solve problems, and every problem, every limitation that comes up in our business is a limitation in me personally, because I'm the person who drives the business. So when I cannot hire the right person, that's my fault. Like, that is, I don't have the skill. I genuinely do not have the skill to identify a talent, hire them, understand how much to pay them, understand who to contact with regards to drawing up a contract. I don't understand any of this stuff. Then I have to onboard them, which means I now have to train them up, which means I have to teach them my thought process. If they're a therapist or if they're an administrator, I need to teach them, hey, here's how we like to do things, which means that my brain has to be less clogged up. It means that it has to be much more streamlined. I have to understand a bit of real estate because we have a new premises that we're renting. I have to understand how much I can push myself, because we have a new baby coming very soon. So I have to be like clear on my schedule. That has been amazing for me. And I realized that if we kept our business as it is, which I've kind of done that for about 18 months. If we kept it as it is, we would be happy. We would have enough money to keep chipping away as long as it stayed like that. And I kind of thought that would be a good thing. But now I realize that actually that would just mean that I've stagnated as a person and my worldview hasn't developed. And the business side of things has been humongous for me to keep developing as a character. And I don't think that's ever spoken about, almost never. I think it's spoken about as like, the bigger you build your business, you automatically become an asshole for some reason. That's what's kind of spoken about. Or you make more money, you automatically become an asshole and you hate people. I have much more empathy for people as I build my business, because I realize all of the shit, faults and stupid thoughts that I have constantly every single day. So that's been huge for me.
When did this become something that was realized? Like when did this become a business, right? Was that always the goal? Like was where you're at now, if you look back in 5 years, you go, yeah, this is on the roadmap.
So the realizations that I just spoke about happened very recently, but what's been motivating me for several years has been fear, I would say, and I'm trying to change that now. I've worked for people in the past. I've worked in office jobs in the past and all this stuff, and I don't do particularly well being told what to do. And when I say particularly well, I'm terrible at it. And I actually get a little semi-ill at the thought of sitting in an office from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 for 30 years. It would be hell on earth for me. So I've been running away from that, and that's been a major motivating factor. You know, when some people ask you on a podcast, like, where's your motivation to build all this come from? The easy answer is like, I want to help every person in the world, and our system is the best, and I'm going to solve everyone's knee pain. Like, there's a bit of that, but 90% was like, I really don't want to fucking work in an office for someone else, so I'm just going to keep going in this way. And then recently I realized that fear is like running away from something is actually very, very powerful. It's a huge activation energy. But now I've changed my mindset where I still want to run away from that, but I have a mindset of I need to run towards this. And I realized that actually along the way, running away from that has made me a much, much, much better person. And I want to keep going in that direction.
Now, with the trajectory a little bit clear set and sort of the negative and positive reinforcements of motivation in place, do you feel like it's perhaps easier to predict what 5 years could look like for you?
Yeah, I do now. Do you want me to say
the obvious follow-up question?
I think we can do a good job of we're doing a lot of education for coaches and therapists now, and I think we've been kind of playing a little small, and I think we can do a good job in being one of the biggest businesses in the industry at educating coaches and therapists how to work with clients, and not in a dogmatic way that like our system is the best, but really teaching people how to think. So we that's where we're going to be, whatever way. I never really know exactly how something is going to look. We've had programs sell to thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the world. I never predicted that. I never predicted anything, but I always thought I'd love to be able to teach. I'd love to be able to work with clients when I want to work with them. So I think we'll have a big business that teaches a lot more coaches and therapists than we do. And we'll have probably a bigger team, a big enough team of people that help us do that as well. Whereas I only realized recently that I wanted that. I think you have a decent sized team, Jordan, do you?
Yeah, all told, staff is mid-30s with like outward-facing coaching staff being about a dozen guys on the team that like know on from Instagram and a lot. Yeah, it's more fun when you get to do it with friends, I think.
I think, yeah, I was like so hell bent on like staying lean and we'll just keep it small and the profit margin will be a bit higher, but it's not as fun. I just want to have fun, you know?
But I also think too, it spoke to me from I am 100% in agreement with you that the number one source of personal development for me was business development, and business development forced the personal development. And the one thing, like as you start to gain a bit of humility and you go, I don't know, I've been wrong more times than I've been right. I've just probably been willing to dust myself off more than others might be willing to, or willing to shovel shit. Is like, there's not a person on the staff that thinks 100% like I think. And I think that level of, understanding that if they come to me with something, they've thought it through. But
Yeah.
if we're discussing something, it's not as if like, no one is contrarian, which I think is, again, I think that I really value, because I think a lot of people are passing themselves off as original, where they're just antithetical to some sort of popular ethos. It's like, that's weak. Like that's reaction. Like that's not thinking and acting. That's just reacting, which I find detestable. So I think it speaks to the personal development that comes alongside business development. I think one hand washes the other, and they both kind of continue to push the rock up the hill, because as you have more faces in the room, you're going to be challenged on a personal level with it all being your fault. Now I have 12 opportunities to understand that everything's my fault every day. And the nice part is, with that comes like the upside is immeasurable of like the exposure you get to thought processes at a high level. The one thing that I find super admirable about you, and just at a very just understanding from afar the scale of your business, is that you're still very focused on like the core product itself, right? Like you're still very focused on the lower body, the core, upper body, foot Achilles program. Like the thing that makes you money. And I think I don't want to be, I don't know, I feel like it's very easy to shit on business coaches, and maybe they deserve it. But your interest, you seem like, when I got into this, I wanted the respect from people that no one ever heard of. Like I want, Charles, rest in peace. Like Charles, Charlie Francis, Derek Woodsky, Luke Lehman, like you're lucky enough to call some of these guys my friends. And it's like, there's a purity to the way you go about it. Have you ever found yourself knocking on the door of an opportunity that may have challenged why you got into this? Like, is ever an opportunity you're like, oh, that'd be pretty good, but that guy's a bit of a fucking duster, or I don't really care for, this type of product or this type of seminar or conference or anything like that? Because I think one thing that you've done really well is stuck to your guns.
Yeah, constantly that the opportunities start to open up, and I actually am quite good at staying focused. Now I am. I never was before, but I had to constantly remind myself. I sometimes think I'm a genius business person, right? And that like I'm this genius entrepreneur. And then I wake myself up. I'm like, no, you're just really good at doing a couple of things really well, and stay focused on that. Like sometimes I'll be looking at a restaurant in town, or a pub, or a coffee shop, or I don't know, some fucking tech business. I'm like, I could do that. And I see, like, I could do that much better than they do it, because we've made okay money at this business. And I have to remember that, no, the reason we've done well at this business is because it's underpinned with a knowledge base that not that many other people have. Not that no one has, but like, I think we're pretty good on that side of things. So I have to stay focused, because I've such an itchy, I don't know, an itchy foot is, I don't know, is that the right word? Where I'm like, I get ahead of my station. I think I'm a genius sometimes, and I bring myself back. I'm like, no, you're just good at one thing. Like keep doing that thing. So I think if we can keep getting better at that thing, rehabbing people from a certain level back to another level, getting results that a lot of other people can't get, multiply that by another 10 years, another 20 years, 30 years, whatever, we'll be in exactly the place that we ever, more than we ever could have dreamed of. And I don't have to stray that far from that. And I don't have to work with dickheads along the way to do that. I can easily turn down work along the way and not mind doing that.
I couldn't imagine if you opened like a cafe, like you wearing like an apron, working on some seasonal latte or something like that. So
Just
yeah,
to prove to myself that I'm better than this
yeah.
fucking Egypt. And it's just like, oh, hang on, I just lost potentially millions of dollars over the course of my career so I could fucking run a cafe or something.
It does seem odd, and I don't even know if I want to pay it much mind. But the push that because that is something that I hear from people who venture into the business side is like they want to prove that they can do it again. It's like, man, I think one thing that's been like a kind of an overarching theme in the discussions we've had about rehab is there's an element of randomness to all this that I think from a worldview perspective, I've really adopted over the last couple of years. I'm just traveling around and like, it's so unlikely that for someone like me growing up where I grew up, how I grew up to be in this situation, that I start to see randomness as like the preeminent driver to a lot of things like that. I think, and even with therapy, it's like, okay, if I put in the work and if I have good intentions, we're going to do the thing that I think is the best. And lo and behold, it seems to be pretty close to the mark. But I'm not at all kind of like you, like, you know, you snap out of this God complex of being a genius and you go, the universe is insane. And I don't know anything. And it's all completely random. But I just can't help but I can't, when I try to understand the thought process of like, why you test fate, like why would you try and run it back? And like, man, we are so lucky. Like I couldn't have told my high school guidance counselor that this is what I wanted to be when I grew up, because this wasn't a job when I was in high school, you know. Like what was it, what was the trajectory originally for you? Like say you know you had a budding sports career, you never got injured, you know, you retired with a bit of money in the account in your mid 20s, and you're now at this point in your 30s, like real estate, like what do people do with their lives? Like I don't understand. Like have you ever thought about that? Like what would your life look like without this?
Yeah, that's what I've ran away from. I'd be working in some shitty office, like doing marketing, whatever that means, for some company that I worked in a alcohol company before. Like I just didn't even like. I mean, it was a cider, a hard cider they call it in the States. I didn't even like drinking that stuff, and it was just a miserable existence for me. So and I was the worst unmotivated person on that side of things. And now I'm very motivated to keep going, literally just at this one thing. So I think, again, people think that they're so smart because they're successful at one thing. And actually, you just maybe got really fucking lucky that you found that one thing, you know? Um, so yeah, and I know you said like don't test fate. I know why we, especially as males, I feel like we want to test fate, and I have to constantly remind myself, because I constantly get the weirdest urge to burn it all to the ground and start again, because which is so fucking weird, because I don't know. It feels like it's like when the United States, everything is going well, and like now we have to go to war in another country. Like we have to find a problem so we can go and fix the problem. Like I don't know. I keep wanting to like. It's sometimes it's not challenging enough, or I believe that to myself, and yeah, no one is ever miserable when they have a big challenge in front of them. You get depressed when you're not working on anything, or you know. So well, I won't say no one, but just males just want to burn shit down. So I have to remind myself not to burn it down.
Well, if you don't, if your wife's within earshot, I'm sure she'll give you a stark reminder about your soon-to-be father role.
Yes.
You know, by the time this podcast airs, you will likely be a father. And I really hope that biology does its thing and quells that urge to burn it to the ground, the empire you built.
Exactly.
It's like your goddamn Irish Genghis Khan of fitness. Like, you just live off the interest, man. Let me tell you. But in the interest of that, man, I do appreciate you taking the time. Long overdue. I'm glad we were able to cross paths last year. Wish you luck with the future. Appreciate you kind of being a sound voice and a sounding board in the industry, and good luck with the family endeavors and everything moving forward. For those, now we're going to bookend this with the real cliched shit on podcasts, which I think you should laminate this. For those looking to find Mr. David Gray Rehab online or on social media, where are the best places for them to find you, sir?
Instagram is a good place to go. So you can just go to David Gray Rehab, Grey, and they might like the sound of my voice on the podcast, maybe, and then they'll see my head or something and fucking hate me when they on Instagram. So it's a good place to make a more rounded approximation of if you like me or not. And then we have a podcast called the DGR Podcast, which I've learned recently. When you're on a podcast, you should plug your own podcast because podcast people listen to podcasts. So I do I do lots of solo episodes there where we break some stuff down, and I have guests, and I'd love to have you on as a guest whenever you're ready. So Instagram and podcast would be two good places.
Brilliant. All right. So I'll do the cliched host thing of the podcast and tell everyone that that's going to be in the show notes for you and all that fun stuff. So Dave, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Look forward to chatting soon, and good luck with everything.
Thanks, Jordan.